We set sail, that was, I think, January 22nd, 1943. I think one day out, we had a boat drill, lifeboat drill. Those of us assigned to the my portion of where I was had to go climb all the way up to the top of the ship. Now, there weren't enough lifeboats to take care of everybody. There were 902 men on boat. So some had to go up, some went into staterooms, and they just pushed us around until they squeezed in 902. Remember, it carried only 302 when it used to be on a cruise. When we got to the top of the boat, this was during the drill, they said to us, of course we had life preservers, when you're up here and something happens, they had rafts and other equipment so that when you jump into the water, should you have to, of course no one knew what was going to happen, we want you to jump into the water from the height there and hold on to the I don't really, people realize how cold it is in Greenland or in the northern waters. But some people up there, soldiers up there, as we were up there, they said, what are they, crazy? This is committing suicide. It's the army you go through. And some of the men, I heard them say that, if we're ever attacked, etc., and we're hit, I'm going to run into and go into a lifeboat. Even though you weren't assigned to it, I'm going. But we forgot about it after that. And when that afternoon, the officer of our detachment of the Army Air Corps came down and he said to Vince, he says, Fruccelli and Epstein, he said, you're the two clerks of our group. You are responsible for the records, personnel records. And since you are responsible, I'm going to transfer you, and I guess it was his room, to a stateroom, and we're going to give you I'm going to give you the records, and they're yours, and you must keep an eye on it. All right. I was glad to get out of there and get up to the stateroom. I can't tell you how terrible the ride on the ship was. The boat was so old that it tossed us from left to right, from front to back. It was just terrible. And most of the soldiers were sick. I really mean sick. I will tell you also a little fun story, unfortunately. One day, we couldn't eat. I couldn't eat. We didn't eat because we were just sick. And one day, Vince gets up and says, Ben, we're crazy. I hear the food's great on board. I think we ought to get dressed and go down and have a good meal. I hear the food is wonderful. I said, Vince, do whatever you want, but don't even mention the word. So there you go. And he did go. Short while later, he returns, and wow, he looked great. It looked as if he ate, God knows, 3 or 4 times. And I said, please don't tell me. He says, no, I'm going to tell you what I ate, and I'm going to make you go down and eat too. And he starts reciting the menu, everything he had. And he's standing at the doorway of our little stateroom. And he says, Ben, he starts eating. And suddenly, as he's talking, he starts to turn color. And when he reached that nauseous green, he just barely made it. We had a little sink in our room. He just barely made it, and he crawled back. It was a small room. And after he finished, he crawled back to his bunk. And he says, Ben, don't talk to me until we reach land. As you know, we had 4 chaplains on board. A Catholic, rabbi, a Protestant, and a Dutch Reform. Very nice guys, and they did their best to help all the men. We made one stop, and that was St. John's, Newfoundland. It's a funny thing, when we got there, we didn't realize until later on that St. John's was a great spy center for the Germans. They had docks, areas where they had their submarines. They used to have signs all over the place. Loose lips shows U.S. with a finger. Loose lips sink ships. Okay, we got up. We had a good meal. I finally ate. It was great. We got back onto the ship, and we continued our journey to Greenland. I will now take you up to the night of February 2nd, the night before the torpedoing arrived. The night before, the captain of the ship spoke to us via the audio system. They informed all of us that we are being followed by a German submarine, a U-2 boat. And they said, we want you to sleep with every bit of clothing that you can get on you. Every bit. Preserver, shoes, stockings, pants, coats, any hat, gloves. Please, they begged us, please. If we get through the night, we're about 100 miles from Greenland. If we get through the night, BW-1, which is the code name, Louis West 1, the code name for the southern post in Greenland. If we get through the night, BW-1 will send planes out in the morning to bring the Dorchester into port. We got to make it through the night. Wish us luck, and don't forget, sleep with everything you have on. And so we did. I'm a cautious fellow, and Vince and I are cautious. We're cautious. We put on all our clothes, and we went to sleep. Well, 1 o'clock in the morning, a tremendous, tremendous explosion. The torpedo hit, 1 o'clock, on the starboard side, the right side. Everything went black. Couldn't see a thing. It was black. Vince, let's go to our station and take the rope down to the boat. Couldn't see anything. We knew where we were, meaning from the room. We just walked. We got to the shore. We were close to the doors leading to the outside deck. We get at the outside deck. We both took on the rail, held on to the rail. He held on to my back and the rail, and we walked to our station. It was cold as anything I'd ever faced. Cold. Icy, slippery. It was just vicious. We got to our station. Now, to get to the boat, our lifeboat, there was a rope hanging down. The rope hung down to the lifeboat. And I said, to Vince, Vince, I'm jumping over the rail, catching on to the rope, and I'm going to slide down to our boat, lifeboat. I want you to do exactly as I do. And he says, I'll follow and do everything you will do, man. I said, okay, I'll see you down below. I leaped, went down. The last I ever saw of Vince. Never saw him again. None. I don't know what happened. When I got down to the lifeboat, instead of finding the required amount of men who were assigned to the lifeboat, it was a mass of humanity. If you recall what I told you, what they said up there, we're going for a lifeboat. Everybody ran for lifeboats. Before the boat could be released, they were held to the Dorchester by cable at either end. And before the boat could be released, it was so overcrowded, the boat, while still attached to the Dorchester, capsized. And these are very large lifeboats. It just turned over, and everybody, practically everybody, I didn't see anybody else, was caught underneath, and you couldn't turn over, you couldn't move. Fortunately, how it happened, I don't know. I must have been on top of the group. I was thrown over. Instead of being caught underneath the boat, I was thrown clear. And when I came up from the water, I realized I was right next to the Dorchester, leaning. By the way, the Dorchester went down within 20 to 25 minutes. And when I realized it came up, and when I realized how close I was to the Dorchester, and realizing that from reading that when a large ship is sinking, it creates a suction and draws everything around it down with it. And so I pushed off. I couldn't see a thing. You couldn't see anything. And I started to swim. And I had all my clothes on, everything. And it was vicious. I swam, and I finally, and fortunately, otherwise I wouldn't be here, I came across a lifeboat. There were 14 lifeboats on the Dorchester, 13 to 14. Only 2 escaped from the Dorchester. 2. When I got to the lifeboat, I grabbed they're very big. Yeah, I grabbed the lifeboat, and I couldn't lift I was so wet, so cold, I just couldn't lift myself up. Impossible. There was soldiers, a couple of soldiers right at the edge there. And I said to them, if you don't help me up, I'm going down because I can't hold on any longer. And wherever they are, I wish them luck because they did drag me in. And when I got into the boat, I turned around sideways, I believe, and I saw a sight that I shall never forget. It will never leave me. The Dorchester making its last lurch as it was sliding down, and it looked like a Christmas tree. There were little red lights all over the ship. And you know what these red lights, each light represented a soldier. On our life preservers, attached to it was a little red light. basically saved our lives, responsible. And each light represented a human being, a soldier. They were frozen in fear. This was frozen in fear. And I don't blame them, because I don't know whether what one will do again if caught in that position. It was cold, it was freezing. And you were going to jump into the Atlantic Ocean, the North Atlantic. And as it was explained to me, and I spoke to many psychologists, they were frozen in fear. They didn't know what to do. Whatever you do, it just didn't seem possible that you could accomplish it. And they just stood there. And they went down with the boat. They went down with the boat. Now, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do a thing about it. You couldn't. So that was really rough. It's interesting. Well, I got anyone in my position with it. You can't get it out of your mind. It's been 64 years, I think, since this occurred, and I can't get it out of my mind. We started to row. Interestingly enough, one of the men on the boat, on the lifeboat, was a young black man. He was in the, he wasn't a soldier, because they, during World War II, they didn't mix blacks or whites, unfortunately. But fortunately, he was on our lifeboat. He was part of the kitchen, I guess. He took over. Must have had a lot of experience, I guess, because he said, let's all sing. Let's keep our spirit up. So we started to sing. Roll, roll your boat, and merrily, 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 etc. And suddenly he said to us, quiet, not a word, nothing. And after a little while, he said, okay, then we can start singing again. He thought he sighted the periscope. And he said he thought they were coming up to shoot us or something. But anyway, we continued on. But I want to tell you, while we were going across, we heard voices of soldiers in the water. And could you hear them? And praying in every language, Father, and this and that. I couldn't see him. We couldn't see him. Black, cold. Didn't know. They were certainly fairly close by. Not that we could have done anything to them, because there was no room in the lifeboat. But you hear men calling out, Father in heaven, save me. I'm freezing to death. So we kept going. And in good fortune, we sighted a cutter, a Coast Guard cutter. That was our protection going across, our trip. Coast Guard cutter during the war, they're not very large ships. They were there mostly when they sighted, or they thought they sighted a sub, they would throw depth charges to get them if they could. But we sighted this Escanaba, a group of men, and they sighted us, the little red lights. And we finally rode towards them, They couldn't stop completely because they were afraid that the submarine would come up to sink us or whatever, kill us. When we got to the boat, whatever it is, the Coast Guard cutter, they had a cargo net down the ship. And they said to us, climb up the rope ladder. In other words, well, it's interesting. A few of us, all I know about myself, the others were able to do it because the others, most of them came onto the lifeboat directly from the Dorchester. They weren't in the water. I couldn't do it. I was conscious, but I was frozen. I told him I can't come up. Two men came down, their rubber suits, and they grabbed me and they carried me up to the boat. Now, I was frozen. I couldn't do anything. The doctor, Nix, the doctor on the Escanaba, tore my clothes off, threw me on a hard table, got 5 crewmen, and he said, he put one each hand and arm, 2 on my body, and 1 on my legs and feet. 5 men. And all he said to them was, rub, rub, rub. He went by me as he put a flask of whiskey, he poured some down. I said, oh, I'm not a drinker. I didn't feel a thing. I didn't feel a thing. Well, they kept rubbing for some time, and he would come by periodically. Doctor, how you doing, soldier? Feeling all right? Any feeling? I said, not yet. And then finally, I got what a feeling it was to feel the little ticks in my skin. My hands came first, then my body, my legs, on my feet, which, by the way, are frozen, are still frozen. That came along later on, and boy, that was a feeling. And when I called, when the doctor came by and I said to him, Doc, I said, I got feeling in there. I'll never forget. He bent down and hugged me. And that's how we got to Greenland. They had not towels, blankets. They gave us blankets. That's the only thing we had. Going walking across. Funny when I think of it now. There's irony to this story. Oh, by the way, I told you 4 chaplains on board. I didn't see this. They probably got on a different side of the boat. The 4 of them took their life preservers off and gave it to those men who didn't have it on. I should have. Every man was given a life preserver. But, you know, there were a lot of young kids, 18-year-old kids on that boat. I felt like an old man. I was 21. And they took their life preservers and gave it to men who didn't have it. And so these are soldiers who saw them, who were near them, I guess. And these 4 men went down with the ship, holding hands and singing together and praying together. And you talk about heroism. This is true heroism. They were all family men, and they knew the moment they took off their life preservers, they would never survive. They couldn't survive. They couldn't. Impossible. That is heroism, true heroism. And of course, it's these men should be honored each year for what they did to save whomever they could. And we do. Over the last 25, 30 years, I've been speaking everywhere, anywhere, into churches, synagogues, veteran organizations, children. It's a real tragedy. It's a sad state of affairs. Sad state of affairs. War is hell. War is hell. And we got to Greenland, and in Greenland at that time, they had 2 posts. One, BW1, Bluey West 1, that's south. That's at the tip. That's the Florida of Greenland. And the other one is BW8, Bluey West 8. That was above the Arctic Circle. When I first got there, I stayed there. They kept me for about a month or so, I don't know, it's some short time, and they were developing Bluey West 8. They each had an airport. There's no other way of getting into Greenland unless you fly in, or by boat. And they shipped me up to BW8, where we were in charge of the airport. And that's where we stayed. Down there and down there. One of the saddest stories I have to tell you is, how was I able to explain to Mary, the wife of Vince? You can't tell anybody how it was. Although she understood. Oh, she was a sweet, wonderful. She asked one question, and not maliciously. When I came back to the States, she said to me, Ben, you were so close. You were brothers. How did you survive and outcome Vincent? I told you exactly how it happened, and that's what happened. How do I explain that? It's pretty difficult. I explained as much as I could. But she understood. She eventually understood. I did find this out later on through. She didn't marry for a good number of years afterward. But she dated it. She had some children. I'm glad she at least had have a little joy out of life. Now, what else? I tell you that. I told you the Escanabra's the ship that they were our savior. They saved us. They meant the world to us. They would come into port periodically, every month or so, about every month or so, to refuel and everything else. And of course, we'd run down to see him, say hello. 4 months later, after they picked us up, they were out, and we get the news. They were hit. All gone, except I think one or two. I can't tell you what it felt like. I can't tell you, Tom. When we got the news, terrible, just a terrible thing. After what they did for us, and we couldn't do anything for them. There were 902 men on board when we started. That was January 22nd, 1943. On February 3rd, 1943, 1 o'clock in the morning, 100 miles from Greenland, we were torpedoed at 1 o'clock in the morning. $762 perished. 230 survived. And probably everybody has a different story of how they survived. It just so. 13 to 14 lifeboats on the Dorchester. Only 2 were able to escape the ship. When we got orders to go home, they wanted to ship us, just the group from the Air Corps. They were ready to put us on a boat to go back. All of us said, we're not going back by boat. Imagine us telling them. We didn't. They got us back by plane.